Welcome, people of the pod, to season 4, episode 2 of Office Hours with Carp and Loge. I am, as I always am on this podcast, Peter Loge, an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University and a strategic consultant. And I am joined, as I always am on this podcast, by
Dave Carp, also an associate professor at GW's SMPA. It's Office Hours with Carp and Loge. Both of us are a little under the weather, but here we are doing this because that's what we do. Peter, how you feeling?
I am feeling less than ideal. I got a touch of the rona. I thought
you been egotistical and think like, I'm not gonna get it, and then like boom, you got it. Is that what happened?
No, I was being relatively cautious, not overly cautious. I'm relatively risky. What happened was I saw Biden said the emergency is going to be over in May, and he declared the pandemic over. And I thought all the cool kids are getting it, so I got to get it before it goes away because I want to be one of the cool kids.
So, listeners, this is evidence of why you should never listen to Peter Loge about what is cool.
But all the kids, they're all doing it. There's a lesson. I did, as I was talking about before the show, I did a live TV interview yesterday morning on Dayquil and day 2 of COVID. That may not have been my wisest choice.
Yeah, do you recommend doing live TV interviews on Dayquil, or do you recommend against it?
It depends if you want to ever be invited back. I think it might be a while before Scripps News calls me again. On the other hand, I was the guy willing to do early Monday morning, so it's a pretty short list of folks.
I would have said no just because it's morning.
Right. I'm not proud, and this is the setup. All right, nobody cares. We're gonna get into it. Before we get into it, though, I want to read some texts from the fans. The fans are happy to have us back. Bless you. The fans are happy to have us back. This comes from a communications director at a national organization. Good to hear the podcast again after a while. Yes, while walking the dog. Just putting that out there. And from another loyal listener who's also a senior communications official at a national communications organization. For the record, I just listened to season 4, episode 1 while walking Cody. That's the dog, not the husband. We got home 3 minutes before it ended. Something for you to consider while editing the next episode. So just saying, dog walking 30 minutes.
I appreciate our listeners low-key shaming me for not walking my dog long enough. Like, I get what you're saying, listeners. I get your judgment, and it hurts.
All right. That's kind of what I got. What do we got going on, Dave? What do you want to talk about? I got stuff I want to talk about. What do you want to talk about?
So Trump is back on Facebook. I've got like a jumble of feelings about that, and it's one of the few things that I'm not going to write a Substack on. I'm writing a lot of Substacks these days, folks. So yeah, I want to talk about that for a minute. Mostly what I want to say is, oh my God, was this obvious 2 years ago?
Right. How is it? Talk about why this is an obvious setup, because a lot of the press has been about speculating why this happened, what's really going on, all the politics around it. But you called this 2 years ago. Why?
Yeah, well, so he was taken off of Facebook after January 6th. And a thing that stood out to me at the time was that was also after the evening of January 5th, right? Because the evening of January 5th is when Democrats win 2 Senate seats in Georgia and assume control of the Senate. And if you're Facebook, what that means is that there's some sort of organizational calculus that just changed. Because that means you're now looking at the next 2 years and saying, oh, Democrats are going to be in charge of all the committees that hold hearings and make us explain ourselves. That's not to downplay January 6th, but I would say when Facebook announced, oh, January 6th, that's the last straw, he committed a violation unlike any other. No, he was violating the rules all the time. So long as Republicans held a House of Congress and the presidency, Facebook was like, oh, you're violating all these rules, but it's newsworthy, we're going to keep you on. Once they no longer control the House, the Senate, or the presidency, suddenly Facebook gets a spine. But even when they got a spine, what they announced was, we are suspending you for 2 years, which means, oh, look, they're going to review this just as soon as the new Congress takes into effect, and just as soon as the next presidential campaign starts. So a thing that was really clear 2 years ago is that Facebook was going to be acting in their own sort of organizational interests. Facebook would like to make lots and lots of money through advertising, and they would like regulators not to yell at Mark Zuckerberg on live television, right? Like they would like their chief executive not to be put in such awkward, awful positions all the time. And the position that they took 2 years ago was phrased as, we are boldly standing up for principles that apply to everyone. But kind of what they meant all the time, all along was, yeah, we would like to face the least trouble that we can. And hey, I get it. If I was running a company, I would do the same thing, right? You would like to make your money and not get into a bunch of regulatory trouble, not get called before Congress too often. So they're putting him back on now. They're making these, they're like offering up these like big claims about how, yeah, we think enough time has passed. We think that there's evidence that tempers have cooled and he'll behave himself. We've set up a bunch of rules that if he doesn't follow those rules, then there will be penalties. And I'm going to tell you listeners right now, he's going to violate all of those rules and there will not be penalties. Because the way things are going, there's been other reporting elsewhere. Right now, all the other Republican candidates are basically hoping that somebody else will take him out and get him not to run. He's going to be running for president. Facebook as a company does not want to be on the wrong side of the guy who might be the chief exec, who might be president again. So they're just going to fold for the next 2 years.
So let's, that I think makes a lot of sense, right? I want to parse this out and then, because there's a couple of conversations I want to get to, but in this specifically, what I hear you saying is that, as comms people, as observers, as pundits, you can say, oh, well, Facebook is doing this and this. You want to know what's going on, like who has power and what is power interested in? And power at this point lies with Zuckerberg and the shareholders and the guys who run this. What are they interested in? Profits. This is a for-profit company. This is not a public utility. This isn't the BBC. If you buy a computer, you don't pay a tax to fund Facebook. This is a private company. At the same time, I don't think they're full of evil people. Like you take all the sociopaths, right? And you screen them somehow and you dump them at Meta headquarters.
No, they're all in crypto. Yeah.
But a lot of them are some of ours, right? I mean, one of the top people at Facebook on the policy side is one of ours. Good guy, smart, interesting, worked in the Senate, but you're competing interests, right? I want to do good, but on the other hand, we've got to make money. How do we balance this? And in the end, what does power want? What does power need? Feed power, right? Yeah. And so I think this is about feeding what power needs, and they're within those constraints doing the best they think they can. But their ultimate, right? That's what elected officials' ultimate litmus test is whether or not you get unelected, right? For Facebook or Meta or Twitter or anybody else, it's whether or not you're losing market share.
I think that's right. And to be clear, I don't think it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's a big deal that he's back on Facebook because apologies to Meta, but I don't think that the platform is as big of a deal as it was 4 years ago or really 6 years ago. Participation is declining. Their stock price is significantly down, and I think for good reason. Fewer and fewer people are spending time on that site. This is part of why they were pivoting to metaverse, is because they knew we're kind of dominating a shrinking category. So like, I don't think that this is a huge deal in terms of the arc of democracy. But the thing I have no patience for is when they were claiming that they were taking a grand stand 2 years ago, that seemed a bit overdone to me. When they're claiming now that actually this is all about policy stances and principles, no, that this is, as you said, this is about power. This is about acting in the interest of the organization. Like, I understand that, like, they can't come out and say, well, now that he's running for president, we really can't have a likely contender for the Republican nominee or nomination just not be on our website. That sounds bad for us in the long term. We're going to get yelled at. Like, they can't say that. So put out your messaging, but I'm not going to take that messaging seriously. That is just messaging that you put out there for the cold hard reality of, now that it looks like he's going to be a front runner for the Republican nomination, we've got to let him on the site. And while we're going to set up a bunch of guardrails, we know that those guardrails are made of like silly string.
Yeah. And you do what you can to put them in. So the first lesson then is, if you're a comms person, pay attention to power. What does power want? Yeah. That's the ultimate, like, that's what you need to pay attention to and message at and respond to. The second, though, you hit on something really important is, so what? Now, this is an area that is out of my depth. You, Ethan Porter, Rebecca Trumbull, others involved with the Institute for Data, Democracy and Politics, which I'll throw in the footnotes, are looking really closely at the impact of social and digital media on democratic norms and things like that. What is the impact of Trump being on social media?
I mean, it helps him to run a more efficient campaign, right? If he was not able to be on Facebook and couldn't fundraise on Facebook, his campaign isn't going to go broke. The one problem that we rarely have in American politics is a lack of money for front-running candidates. But that has in the past been one of his major sources of small dollar revenue. So that would just be gone. It would also be a sticking point that I kind of think would drive him a little bit nuts on the campaign stage. Like, a thing he would keep on fixating on is not just 2020 was rigged, but 2020 is rigged, and Facebook still won't let me on. Can you believe it? That's so rigged against me. Which would have been a gift to DeSantis and the other people running against him, because it makes him look like he can't get over the last thing. So that would have been a benefit to his opponents. The other thing he would have done, though, is just in terms of enforcing norms. There's a piece that I wrote, pre-COVID, so it feels like forever ago now, called On Disinformation and Democratic Myths. And the main point one of the main points I tried to make there was norms amongst political elites only keep on functioning so long as something bad happens to you when you break them. So the broader thing that I see happening here is when Facebook kicked him off the site, that at least was a signal that if you lead an insurrection, if you lead a coup attempt in the United States, then yeah, you're going to lose your social media accounts. And what we're seeing now is, haha, we were kind of just kidding. If you lead a coup attempt and you fail, then up until your party gains some power again and you get to run again, we're going to put you in timeout. And so that just again signals that there is no bottom in terms of elite behaviors enacting a cost on the elites because they went too far.
So two things. And one, we'll put that link, a link to the piece in peterlodge.com/podcast, and also on my Medium page where we post links to things, post the footnotes. But the other question, which is much more, I think, in the news is this the end of democracy? Like, we talk a lot about, media pundits, some academics say that social media is the demise of democracy. America was rainbows, puppies, and unicorns. Then Donald Trump and Twitter, and the wheels came off. What do the data say about the impact on democracy of social media?
Oh, social media broadly. I mean, the way I've phrased it in the past is it's an accelerant of these negative trends, right? Like, it wasn't puppies and rainbows before. We were in bed, like if you go back to 2008, if you go back to like the Bush era, if you go back to during Obama birtherism, go back to Newt Gingrich, there isn't a time in the past quarter century where you wouldn't, if you looked a bit, you wouldn't say, oh, I can see an awful lot of the phenomena that turn into the moment that we're in 2022 or 2020. So what social media ends up doing is being an accelerant of these negative trends. We got a lot of other bigger things to fix. And like trumping on social media, like, no, that's not the demise of democracy. The broader phenomenon of the Republican Party turning anti-elections, or at least anti-elections that they don't win, which we were seeing a ton of going into 2022. We've seen a bit less of it since then, specifically because their Secretary of State candidates who were election deniers all lost. And so right now within the Republican Party network, you're getting some bubbles of them saying, oh, wow, we don't win elections when we say that. Let's not say that. Nonetheless, there's still a long way to go for that party network to decide we're going to be in favor of free and fair elections, even the ones we don't win. That's the real threat to democracy, because if they gain power while the segment of their coalition that doesn't believe in elections is the dominant segment, then like America's not that special. Like other countries stop being democracies too, that can happen. But yeah, that's not a social media thing. That's a decline of elite norms and who is in power within a party network thing.
So I think that's spot on. And I want to change the subject in a second because of time, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. The first is, I think the problem is way predates Gingrich, predates the colonies, like predates everything. This is how people behave. It is worth noting that George Orwell, who many of our students have lied about having read in high school, among other things, collected
Our students would
pamphlets.
never lie, sir.
They never lie. They never lie.
Never.
The Chat GPT read it for them. The so I'm told. The interestingly enough, Chat GPT wrote that joke. It did not. That's the Dayquil talking. At any rate, among other things, among many other things, my whole goal is to get you to grab your face in the podcast. Mission accomplished.
Which is great because, as we all know, podcasts are a visual medium.
Again, this is on YouTube. People watch it. We get views.
Oh man,
we get
on point, Dayquil boy.
Dayquil boy. That's my favorite superhero. Excuse me. All right, here we go. So, George Orwell collected pamphlets, and pamphleteers were the social media mavens of the colonial era. Print things off, hand them out on street corners, post them on posts. And Orwell wrote this great line that basically describes pamphlets as social media. Right? They could be prose or poetry or factual or made up or funny or whatever. They just had to be scurrilous and short. I'll post that link there. So we've done that for a long time. In the Adams-Jefferson presidential campaign, the president of Yale, which is sort of the GW of Connecticut, was an Adams supporter. And he said that if Thomas Jefferson were elected president, our wives and daughters would be subject to legal prostitution. Alexander Hamilton, before he was a song and dance man, had something of a career as a political guy, would pay people, would write under assumed names, making things up about his political opponents. Adams made up stuff about Jefferson and put it in the press. Jefferson paid people to make stuff up about Adams. Like, we've never been nice, but as you say, faster, more bots, more access, more of everything. I think accelerant is the right metaphor. The last thing on this, I want to put in a plug for our colleague Ethan Porter and his colleagues' work on elite political rhetoric and democratic norms, looking specifically at Trump supporters believing whether or not the election was rigged, and Trump supporters believe him, and they agree. They go along with this norm breaking, but others may not believe it as much. So if you're already in the tank, you stay in the tank. If you're not in the tank, maybe you don't jump in the tank. I want to talk Trump briefly.
All right, and then you want to talk soccer too, right?
What?
You want to talk Trump and then soccer, right?
I want to talk protests. I want to talk, but I do want to talk Trump really briefly with the presidential campaign.
All right.
You pointed out something a few minutes ago, important, that at this point, there's a dozen or so potential Republican candidates not named Donald Trump. Sarah Isger mentioned this in our special holiday episode, the holiday being, of course, your birthday.
Exactly.
We gave you 2 cakes.
Most wonderful time of the year.
So what's the read there? We got potentially a dozen candidates, governors, Trump administration officials, and others. And of course, we've already got Trump. What does this do for the Trump campaign?
I mean, it diffuses the competition so that it's not just DeSantis versus Trump. It's everybody hoping that Trump gets out of the way, which looks a lot like 2016, right? Like, part of the reason why Trump was able to win in 2016 was Trump was the top choice, but the Republican Party network didn't want him. The second choice was Ted Cruz. Nobody likes Ted Cruz.
Even his friends, the joke in the Senate is even his friends don't like him.
Yeah, and they're like, people will sometimes show videos of like his kids not wanting to hug him. Like, yeah, I get it, right? I mean, maybe the people in Cancun, they're like, but anyway, so Ted Cruz was second, and there was this waiting game amongst everybody else, sort of a coordination game of, well, once Trump starts to drop in the polls and people cohere around an anti-Trump, that could be me. And in particular, if the person who was second was like, I don't know, Rubio or Christie or anyone but Ted Cruz, then I think it would have been more reasonable to see all the others drop out and just endorse them to stop Trump. But they weren't going to drop out and endorse Cruz because he's Ted Cruz. Come on. Right. So they all kind of waited for somebody else to fix things. And then before you know it, Trump has just won the nomination, and they all look around at each other like, God, I guess we're doing this. It's now 2023. We're heading into the 2024 election. And again, all of these candidates are looking around like, maybe Trump will just, I don't know, drop out. Maybe he doesn't want to do this. But anyway, if I just wait around long enough, maybe people will cohere around me. Now it's still very early. This is going to be going on for forever. We won't even have votes cast for what, 11, 12 months?
Yeah, year, yeah.
Yeah, so there's still plenty of time, but the language that's coming out of Republican elites to reporters of, maybe Trump just wants to be senior statesman in the party. I think he's going to look at the polls and just drop out. Like, you don't actually believe that, right? Like,
Yeah, that's
no one
garbage.
believes that.
Yeah.
So this again leads me to think there's a pretty strong chance that he ends up being the nominee, because against a wide field, he carves them up just like last time. I still think that DeSantis is a Hobbesian candidate. I think he's nasty, brutish, and his campaign will be short. But I think once again what we're seeing is a lack of courage from many Republican leaders, and lacking courage, Donald Trump just keeps on being the leader because no one will stand up to him.
I think that makes a lot of sense as a read, and we've, as we've talked about before, there's a piece of this though that I do want to highlight. Is that Trump is now running what looks like a more traditional campaign. He's putting up policy positions, policy videos. He's having smaller meetings. He's looking like a real candidate, which I understand the logic of, and I think is a terrible, terrible idea. If I were his campaign staff, that is not what I would be doing, because if Trump competes as if he were DeSantis, he loses.
Yeah.
Because DeSantis is more DeSantis than Trump is. Trump's strength is he's Trump. And DeSantis is trying to be enough Trump to get the anger and resentment while still being a good policy guy and, not indicted. Right. And I think though, if Trump tries to pretend like, hey, I learned my lesson, I'm actually a grown-up, it's not going to work. Right. His numbers will not go up. They'll continue to shrink. Then of course he's going to backlash, right? This wasn't a Pauline conversion, right? He wasn't, walking on the golf course on the way to Damascus and came across a humbled looking Ron DeSantis, said, my son, where are you going? Right. This was a, hey, I'm going to get this guy. Here's how I'm taking seriously. What do you mean I'm not taking seriously? And he's going to start throwing, bags of candy in the grocery store.
I mean, I think you're right. But the clock also really stands out to me that Trump is going to go back to doing the things that have worked for his campaign in the Republican primaries right around the time they start to have Republican debates.
If they have the debates, I'm not persuaded anyone's going to agree to debate.
Yeah, I don't know that they'll debate against the Democrats, but Trump is going to want to debate, and I think they're going to not want to be on stage with him. And then he's going to call them names until they agree to. These are egotistical enough people that when he starts heckling them and making good TV of it, they're not going to do the smart thing. They're going to say, okay, fine, I'm going to debate you. And then he'll start holding them out. Once he's got someone he's really running against and debates where that he can treat like reality TV, then he's going to do that. But it's January 2023. Is he going to hold a bunch of rallies while 17 other people all quietly blame him for things, but hope he gets out of the way? I think that's good. I think that's inevitably going to come. When it does, there'll be a bunch of stories about how the campaign has decided to let Trump be Trump again, and we'll make fun of that on our podcast.
Right. That is an excellent point. All right. Again, with the 9 o'clock, moving on. Do you want to talk about protests or do you want to talk about other stuff?
I mean, the thing I want to say about the protests is I don't want to talk about the protests. And the reason I don't is that I feel like we've already reached a pattern that I saw for a while with the gun violence protests of a tragedy happened. We kind of know the social scripts. We kind of know that elites are going to kind of say that they find it all sad and terrible and there ought to be some investigating and we should have courage in our hearts. And the momentum amongst political elites to actually say it is a problem that cops can so indiscriminately kill Black people. There isn't a solution set that people are united around right now, and lacking a policy solution, lacking a thing that we then say, okay, now's the time, or at least in a way that significant number of politicians would actually bother to do so. It kind of feels like they're just going to be waiting it out, and we'll be back here with the next tragedy. That's not to take away from that. That's I'm trying to voice a frustration here of this is a moment that we find in the long arc of social movements, and it is a depressing ass moment. And this too shall pass. Later moments do come, but at this stage, there is a tragedy, there is outrage and sadness, and there will be another tragedy later. That's the phase we're in with this social movement, I think.
So I mean, I think that that's unfortunately right. A couple of things jumped out at me from this last weekend. And I don't know about you, but I couldn't watch the video. I
couldn't
felt
either.
some personal responsibility. I should bear witness, but I'm not sure I have it in me. And that's probably a little bit selfish, but I'm not sure. Like I just don't have it in me. There are two things that strike me. One is I want to give a shout to a field of scholarship we haven't given a shout to. We've talked about protests in the past on this podcast, but one is rhetorical theory, right? So coming out of the 1960s, a bunch of rhetorical scholars looked at the rhetoric of protest, the rhetoric of protest movements. And one of the famous books is called The Rhetoric of Agitation and Control by Bowers and Oakes, which I will throw in the footnotes. And there's this question of what are the arcs, what are the rhetorical arcs of it, right? And you've talked a bit about that now, like, oh, now we've reached the sort of hopes and prayers. What happens next? What has to happen to the rhetoric? What are the inflection points? Like, can we track the rhetoric of this to determine what happens? The second thing I would put out, and why I wanted to bring this up today specifically, is I saw an interview with one of the organizers of a protest in Tennessee. And he said something, tragic moment, all of that. And the issues are too complicated and too embedded for an easy policy solution. There's just too much going on for an easy policy solution, which of course is true.
Right.
But strategically, you need to offer something. You need to say, and this could have been edited out of the interview. The guy could have said it and the producer edited it out. You and I have both certainly been in that position. But it could have been like, a first step would be disbanding the Scorpion unit. A first step would be better mental health support for law enforcement. A first step, like, there's got to be a thing you're asking for, right? If you demand a seat at the table, when you sit down at the table, you got to know what you're going to order. And I've seen this consistently in social science research on protests. You and I have seen it in strategic communications campaigns. Time and attention are our most precious commodities. You've got my attention, do something with it. And I think I think they need that. I think that was a missed opportunity for this organizer.
I think that's right, though I would cast a different angle on it, which is, again, like, this is the reason why my mood is like, oh, because I don't think there is like, you're right, that structurally we need a thing to be asked to do. And if you lack that, then the moment's going to go by. And also, since I think we're at a phase of there isn't one of those things, and whatever thing you would put out there is going to seem hollow and is going to lead allies to say, yeah, but that's not really it. Like, that's kind of cheap to suggest that. Particularly given that this movement and movements like of this sort are motivated by tragedies, which means that there's kind of a, like, to say, like, we need better mental health training for police. Like, that can't be what you're calling for. So what all that adds up to is, strategically, this one is going to fly past, and it's going to fly past because the system is designed to only reward you if you can make a clear ask. And this is big enough and complicated enough that you're not going to have a clear ask. So instead, what we're going to get is sort of further into the muck. And eventually we will work out some levers to call for, but we're not there right now, which just means I don't know if I would call it a missed opportunity, because it's not here's the thing you should have called for, so much as it'll be really nice if there was a thing to call for. Hopefully sometime we get there. Hopefully we get there someday.
I think it could have been a yes and. I mean, I think you're right, but I think an answer could have been hugely complicated. This is centuries old problem. This is baked into every corner of American life. We can't solve all of it at once. One thing we can do right now is abandon the Scorpion unit. Second, look at other similar units or functions around the country in law enforcement, while we are simultaneously doing these other things. Like, if the only answer you give me is wait till it gets worse, like, that's depressing and awful, and it's not helpful. And even if my one thing isn't helpful, you give me a bit of hope, and you keep me engaged, so that when it does get worse, I'm ready to sort of act.
Yeah, and well, so to be clear, the messaging wouldn't be, yeah, let's wait till it gets worse. But the messaging, I think right now, I think it's okay for the messaging right now to be, this is a deep problem, and then focus it on something like more like continuing to give more money and permissions to a police that are killing Black people indiscriminately cannot be the answer every time.
Right.
And even though that's not a thing you can do something with, that's a thing that then like that is a drumbeat that over the longer term, since it's true, can hopefully resonate into and here's what we can do now. Like I
Then
think
it's the thing. Then,
it's
then,
a
it's, then
place
you're
where I think
pushing then you're pushing the frame. Like at least give me a way to push the frame or shift
Sure.
something.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
tell me
at
to.
least push the frame in a deep way. I would say that, yeah.
Right. Okay. Again, out of the clock, I'm going to fly through this last one. We're going to do some plugs because we will continue this. Unfortunately, this is a topic we will come back to because this is America in 2022, 2023. Bit of a different take. There's a team in the second division of English soccer called Reading FC that is working with the University of Reading. This, I think, is a really interesting piece of strategic communications. The jerseys are made of recycled plastic. There are sleeves on the jerseys have colored stripes indicating the levels of climate change to raise awareness, but not just raise awareness, because again, the jerseys are made of recycled plastic. And the University of Reading, and I'm reading here from the press release from the university, the new kits are part of a wider partnership between the two organizations in which sustainability experts at the university are supporting the football club on ways to reduce the carbon footprint. Fans will notice additional recycling drives, more sustainably sourced food when they visit the stadium, a range of green initiatives put into practice across the club to build positive work already in progress. Which I think is a really good example of we're going to raise awareness and we're going to explain this thing and we're going to give you something else to do. And maybe we're going to model good behavior that others can follow. I raised this with my graduate students last night. One of them pointed out the design on the sleeves looks cool. And from a design perspective, she thought, oh, that's a cool design. It's not obvious that it's climate change. When you're watching a soccer game, you're not thinking, I bet that's climate change. But they are taking these other specific actions. What do you think? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's nice. It doesn't leave me real excited, right? Because anything that is not pressuring and creating discomfort amongst powerful people who won't do what they need to do unless they're uncomfortable doesn't ignite my heart. So like I think it's good. I think it's nice to build and model particularly more sustainable practices for things that bring people joy that we want to keep on having in the world that we're building tomorrow. Like there's still going to be soccer in the world that we want to build. And so showing like, how do you have giant soccer matches that also have much smaller carbon footprints? Like, I think that's good. I don't think that's great, because the thing that I think would be great is shaming and pressuring the powerful.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And that's the difference between me and Dave. I want the cool little thing that works, and Dave actually wants to solve big problems.
I you know, like I'm an Alinsky. I always go back to this old line from Utah Phillips on his album with Ani DeFranco, because that just told you how old I am. You got to mess with people day and night. You got to mess with them. Like, that's great. It doesn't mess with anybody, I don't think. And like, I kind of want to mess with powerful people. That's what makes me happy.
It's kind of your jam. Kind of your jam. All right. I think that's all I've got. Before we go, plugs. We didn't plug your Substack last week, and I imagine your readership is cratering as a result.
Actually, my readership is going bonkers right now. It's way up. Because I wrote 3 posts last week. I wrote one so far this week. I wrote a post last week that was just kind of a thrown off idea, where I just wanted to point out how Twitter is becoming a ghost town. And you can tell because you can look at the view numbers and see like 5% of the people who follow me on Twitter ever see any of my posts, because I think they all just kind of left Twitter or don't use it anymore. And I shared that on Twitter and on Mastodon, and like the entirety of Mastodon was like, that's a very good point. So yeah, people are reading my Substack. People are talking. Check it out, davekarp.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter, but you'd be like the only person finding me there because like no one's left there. How about you?
I was speaking of Ghost Town. I'm like suddenly popped in my head the Specials song Ghost Town. I'll put the link in the footnotes for the kids. I'm still on Twitter, although it's unclear why at PLOGE, and I'm also on Post. And I keep hoping it'll be more than me and Semaphore on Post, because
I'm technically on Post. I just don't remember my login.
it's like all the feed is from Semaphore, Brendan Nyan, and I think that Brendan's great, smart, good guy, but
Can I get you over to Mastodon? You gonna sign up for Mastodon?
that seems complicated. I just figured out Instagram, which basically I'm using as Pinterest. Oh, look, cool cars. Oh, look, books. Oh, look. Basically, I'm using, nobody
All right,
cares.
so my task after you're clear of COVID is to teach you how to log on to Mastodon.
I don't need this. It's a lot of things to keep track of.
I'll-
All right, we're
I'll
already
walk you
over.
through
I
the Grandpa.
apologize to the
I'll
very
walk you
tired
through.
dogs. I apologize to the very tired dogs.
But if you stuck around, you did get to hear me call Peter Loge Grandpa, so that's fun.
Grandpa, what?
I just said I'll walk you through it, Grandpa. You were talking, you didn't hear it. This is getting cut. Whatever.
Whatever. Follow us, rate us, like us, tell your friends. I don't know. Don't get COVID. Thanks everybody. See you next time.
Bye.